oftentimes President Trump talks about fake news. Well, this is an example of the media doing a horrendously terrible job in a way that he certainly won't talk about. New York Times found the president participated in dubious tax schemes, including outright fraud, in its year-long investigation. Meet the Press, This Week, Face the Nation, and Fox News Sunday ignored it. So the article there that was linked to is a Media Matters article. They, from time to time, do these analyses where they'll watch, all of cable news for a month, and then they'll report on how many times very important issues were reported on, and oftentimes the media just doesn't report on some of the most important stories. And this is an example of it here. The big Sunday shows just totally ignored this year-long investigation from the New York Times. We covered that in detail on this show. And it's honestly inexcusable. Because I genuinely believe that what they're doing helps Donald Trump. Because they find a way to put front and center the stories that don't affect him in a negative way and sometimes even help him. And they always think like they nailed it and they have like a home run, like the Stormy Daniels thing, for example. Oh, they went all in on that Stormy Daniels thing. Now, am I saying that's not a story? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. In fact, you should cover that story. But the disproportionate coverage that got compared to, for example, the emoluments case against Trump. There are at least two court cases that are proceeding because there's evidence that Donald Trump is taking money from foreign governments. By the way, not Russia. If it was Russia, they'd cover it endlessly. But taking money from foreign governments, including Saudi Arabia, Israel, and others, at his businesses, and then he's doing favors for those businesses. Okay, that is like the definition of corruption. Barely gets mentioned at all. There's a case about the President of the United States acting in an unconstitutional fashion, illegally taking bribes and doing the bidding of foreign governments. Barely a mention. A year-long investigation found Donald Trump got rich because of his daddy and his family doing tax fraud in order to pass the money illegally down to the kids. I think that's a pretty important story, especially given the fact that part of Trump's campaign was, I'm a brilliant businessman. I'm an unbelievable businessman. That's how I have all this money. So obviously you should elect me because I know what I'm doing. That was a key part of his campaign. We learned that that's all a fraud. Shh, barely a mention. Barely a fucking mention. So, yes, there is a point to be made. Blame mainstream media for Trump's election in the first place, for the fact that Trump's approval rating as of right now is pretty much where a normal president's approval rating would be at this point in time, which is maddening, but it's true. That's true. That doesn't have to be the case. Like, I need everybody to understand that's not like, oh, that's just how it is. Like, that's set in stone. His approval rating wouldn't change no matter what. No, if you had the media doing their job properly, his approval rating could be down by what fucking Congress is. Congress's approval rating is usually around 20%. Trump's could be around 20% as well, if you had the media do their job in an effective way. Imagine if everybody knew the details of this story and how, they bent over backwards. At the time, the tax rate, their dad passed on over $1 billion to all the kids. Collectively, they got $1 billion. Over $1 billion. Trump always talked about how, and his dad was listed as, he had $400 million. That's not true. They lowered that number drastically so they could pretend like the wealth that they got was not inherited from daddy. They had these complex schemes where they'd have this business. They'd say, this table costs $300. Really, the table costs $100, but they would skim the $200 off the top and put it right in their fucking bank account. They would devalue their properties by 10 times or more. Like, they would pretend like a $1.6 million house or $1.6 million property cost $100,000 so they could dodge more taxes. They were supposed to pay, at the time, the tax rate on all the inheritance, it was supposed to be about 55%. 55% on $1 billion. Oh, I know, your heart would bleed for them if they somehow made only $450 million for doing absolutely nothing. Please, spare me. Fuck, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that? 55% tax rate. Oh, they ended up paying 5%. That's what the tax rate they ended up paying was. They're supposed to pay 55. They paid 5. Trump went bankrupt 6 times. He's not a good businessman. His image is, I'm a good businessman. He's a terrible businessman. He inherited everything from daddy. Entitled Donnie Trump was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He's a fraud. Not a mention on the Sunday shows. Not a mention. And also, again, committing crimes. Let's be clear. And the article points out, no, these are like crimes were committed, including by Donald Trump himself, not just his dad, but him as well. It's just they focus on the wrong things. So here we are. Embarrassing, pathetic, sad, and yet again, this is why people feel like they have to come to new media and watch my rinky-dink YouTube show in order to get the truth, because they sure as hell aren't getting it from mainstream media.